Hey, so thank you everybody for being here and for the patience we get the equipment set up. I appreciate you being here and helping Ada and I share with you about equity, diversity, and inclusion. Now, we have 3 people on the slides that we're meant to be here presenting. I'm here, and Ada will do a quick introduction in a second. Renata Burwash sends her regrets she's unable to be here today, so it is simply Ada and myself. Now, we're thinking about ways to introduce.
Yeah, that's right. So you are so tall, as is obvious to everyone. Or do you play basketball then, Mike?
I play basketball. My son's a little bit taller than I. He plays volleyball. Mm-hmm. So between the two of us, we have these sports covered. I play basketball, and I coach basketball as well.
Yeah, if you want to send kids for basketball, Mike is a good coach. So when I first started teaching at MacEwan, it was 7 years ago. That's when we first met. I know you had a career in HR in the government, but you had a different aspiration. So you joined academia, research, and teaching. So maybe tell us a bit more about that background.
Yeah, I 15 years in Alberta government from a variety of roles in HR capacity, from an entry-level HR generalist, towards the end working at data analytics and HR community development. We have 350, or they have 350 HR people in downtown core of Edmonton, but being in different buildings, different functions, they didn't always necessarily interconnect. And so part of my job was to help groups of people get to know each other and work well together. Now, after a couple years of doing that, MacEwan had a posting for a professor position, and I had just been in a presentation with some MacEwan students giving consulting advice to us in the government about how we might work effectively in HR. I thought I'd like to be on the side of the table that's producing these students, than on the side of the table that is benefiting from their expertise. And so MacEwan had a posting for a professor, thought it might be time for a mid-career switch. Fortunately, I was able to join over, so from 2015 onwards, I've been with MacEwan. In the last 2 years in more of an administrative position as a department chair for the area of organizational behavior, human resource management, and management. Now, you have quite a bit of background in HR as well.
Yes, that's my passion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And besides some of the regular consulting work, you also do some writing work. You do a blog with CPHR Alberta.
That's right, yeah. So I write blogs in my leisure time, and I have been consulting for a number of years, been doing in HR for 15 plus years in general. I've always been a generalist. I also teach part-time at MacEwan University.
Yeah. And talk a bit about my recreation, because I count coaching basketball as recreation. In fact, Christmas gifts this year was some basketball equipment. So I helped a coach at FAC in Sherwood Park. And so we got some gear to help the young ladies figure out foot placements and cones and pop-up defenders. So that's what I partly do for fun. And for you, for recreation, you go to the mountains.
I do. So in our family, we have a tradition of carrying some ropes to the mountains, whether it's the summer or the winter. Not fun of running into bears, but that will happen once in a while. Other than that, I do go to the gym and love swimming.
Excellent. Now, you got a better sense of us. And I got an idea that you know each other a little bit. Yeah. And if you don't mind helping me get to know you, that would be wonderful. And if we can start here just with a quick intro and something you might like to share, work, hobby, other, just help me get to know you a little bit. Right. Okay. So, oh, well, sure. I'll take anything you do my way.
Yeah.
So we're talking with you today about equity, diversity, inclusion, and our sessions about foundations about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And from our conversation today, we hope you leave with a few ideas of foundational concepts, some of the terms, the definitions, some important reasons why we want to be advocating and acting on equity, diversity, and inclusion, and some thoughts about what might get in our way, even if we have good intentions, and what forms those intentions, but also what kind of prevents those from becoming actions. So that's where we're going today, and the formalized agenda is up on the screen. And Ada and I have split up our conversations to get both of us about equal times. You might see if that's a good thing at the end of it. You might have preferred Ada over me, in which you talk more, but we have both to split up as we go through different topics. Before we get further, though, I do want to do a land acknowledgement, so bear with me as I bring up my papers and read the session for today.
As I am going to have to run, so I just want to meet everyone and whatnot, and thank you very much for
Thank you.
meeting over here and whatnot. Thanks, guys. I'll talk to you later.
So I've adapted this one from the Parkland School Division, so it may sound familiar. With peace, harmony, and unity, we honor the land on which the Chamber and companies reside and service, in particular land of Treaty 6. We recognize and acknowledge this as traditional and ancestral land, home to many First Nation, Métis, and Inuit, including immediate neighbors from Alexander Cree Nation, Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation, Enoch Cree Nation, and Paul First Nation. We take the time to recognize the land as an act of reconciliation and gratitude, And we acknowledge Indigenous values, traditional teaching, ways of being, and contributions and historical inequities. We respect all cultures with an open heart and an open mind. So let's go into our first slide. And Ada, if you'd like to stand, you're welcome to. If you'd like to have a quick seat, we're going to be chatting for a couple minutes here. If I say these magical words to you, dinner party, what is your first reaction if I say I'm having a dinner party at my house? Any positive, negative thoughts, any worries, considerations? What comes to mind?
Great.
Great.
Great, yeah. I'm hosting. Fantastic. Just show up, bring a bottle of wine or whatever you would like. Great, sure.
Oh, nice.
My first thought is, can you cook?
Great, sure. What if it's suggested to you, you being voluntold you're doing a dinner party? So now it's your place. What's going through your mind as you're thinking about hosting a dinner party?
Jan's going great.
Yeah.
I'm gonna serve. I'm gonna.
Okay, what are you going to serve? No, why might you be concerned about what you're going to serve?
You want people to like it?
You want people to like it. And if you don't know them intimately, you may not know if they're a pepperoni on pizza kind of person, or they're avoiding bananas, or if
They're
they're
vegetarian.
vegetarian.
Or if they have allergies.
Right?
Yeah.
There's all these things you need to know about a person just to host them well for supper. Right? At my house, I'd be thinking about space. Right? You know, if I'm having a stand-up dinner party, maybe it's more people in the house could fit. But if it's sit down at a table, we have a kitchen table, maybe 6 people, 7 if we squeeze them tight. Now I've got a limited number of people that I can bring. So my question becomes, who's invited? And why are they invited to my dinner party? Or who's not invited and why are they not invited? Right, so we're starting to think about who's in our group or not in our group. If I need to set the table, in my house it's going to be placemats, dinner plate, cup, fork, knife kind of thing. Are there other ways to set a table?
Yeah.
What might be some other ways to set a table?
Buffet style.
Buffet style, sure. So a whole bunch of the chafing dishes, right? People can serve themselves as they go. Absolutely.
Like multiple sets of cutlery and chargers and like all the courses. Like
Yeah.
plates if it's that kind of dinner party.
Like there's the salad fork and the shrimp fork, if we're going to go that far, right? Starting to think about what might be there. How many spoons do we have? Now in this, I'm starting to still think about a Western style table. Are there different ways that different cultures might sit for dinner party?
On the floor.
Sorry?
On the floor.
Could be on the floor, right?
Yeah.
Some Arabic cultures, some Japanese groups, right, would have not chairs, but a different seating arrangement, right? Or some people groups don't eat with forks and knives; they eat with other utensils, or with bread as the main serving. So something as simple as we're having a dinner party can actually become this very expansive conversation about norms and assumptions, who's in, who's not in, how do we serve, and will the people coming feel comfortable or not comfortable at my party? Now, this session is not about eating and dinner parties, right? We can do that afterwards. It is about in the workplace, but it's a useful analog to think about assumptions, norms that you may have from your place in life. And me as a Western-born white male, right? I have certain views of the world. And that's okay. But now that I've started to think about other ways that people groups might think about food, I have a bit of a responsibility to learn more. And as I'm having conversations with the other people, to understand that they may be approaching something as basic as 2 or 3 times a day of eating could be different than mine. And I might be better off from learning about how they approach that topic and not simply assuming that it will become like I do. We kind of got into food considerations.
There's a question.
Oh, yes,
Sorry,
please.
just a quick question. Will we be provided with the slide deck?
Yeah, I'll be happy to
Or-
share it out afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd
the
be
chamber
good.
will send it out.
Okay, thank you.
You know. And so whether we're talking about food, which does show up in our workplace, lunch breaks, recognition celebration, company events and parties, right? It's an actual direct analog and connection there. or the other things, the metaphorical, who is at your table and why, some of the norms and expectations, and whether it shows up in compensation type topics, training type topics, staffing type topics, this kind of connection can be helpful. Now, Ada will take over in a few minutes and talk a bit deeper about some definitions and views of equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'll try not to stand in the way of the slides here. But as I think about these topics, one of the ways that I think about EDI is about the egalitarianness of a workplace. How equal or equitable is it? And for what reasons are we not treating people the same? Or bringing them into the organization but not actually letting them participate well in the organization. I was at a recent presentation, Angus Watt was presenting to a group of property management and property developers, and he was sharing that 80% of the labor growth in the next 5 years in Canada is expected to come from immigration. So people that are here will have children that are growing into the workforce, so that will happen. But 80% of the new jobs or new employees, are from people coming in from outside Canada. And as we think about people coming in from outside Canada, there are going to be some natural thoughts about race and language, for sure. But there's other things that people are bringing with them, and it's their view of how social structures work. So there's a slide here, meant to be just kind of illustrative that there's ups and downs, but it's based on the work of Hofstede, Gert Hofstede. And if I share that name with you, does that ring a bell to anybody who... I would be surprised if it did. Partly because it's a little bit dated. Gert Hofstede's work started in the 1980s, and it perpetuates now. If you look for a website, which I can share with you afterwards, you'll see his more recent work. But he was working with IBM in the mid-80s, and noticed that when he went to different countries, even though the IBM policies were the same, or substantially the same, people were working in different ways depending on the country they were in. So he set on a separate project to understand, well, why is it that people will do a sales transaction in different countries differently? And he identified several different factors, I'll read them out for you in the bottom here, about power distance, individualism, masculinity, uncertainty avoidance, long-term orientation, and indulgence. But a couple of these, the power distance, individualism, and masculinity, are some things that people hold in their mind about how groups should interact or how people should be responsible for themselves. And they vary by country, they vary by culture. And so power distance, the idea about status. If you think about a workplace, does the boss get the corner office or the big office? Many people would say yes, right? And people that are lower status in an organization, it's fair and right that they have a smaller cubicle, right? If you agree with that, there'd be a high power distance score for you. If you would say no, everybody in the workplace should be having the same size office, same access to parking perks, same access to special washrooms or not, you'd have a low power distance. And there are some stories about airline pilots, and Malcolm Gladwell has one chapter in his book. I have to remember the name, bear with me. We talked about why one airline company, it was an Asian company, had more accidents than others. It's because in the culture there was high status difference, power distance. And so the flight navigator and the first officer couldn't actually tell the pilot, hey, we have a problem. It wasn't appropriate for them to tell the pilot. They could ask questions. They could lead, but it wasn't right because of status difference to direct the senior officer. Individualism. To what extent are you your own person and responsible for yourself? Or benefit and rely on the group to help you? So we could see that as individualism and collectivism. And Dean, you mentioned you work in benefits. You might see this argument come up quite a bit, where some people might say, I'm a young, healthy, capable person. I don't want to pay into a benefit plan that helps the people that are older, more health concerns, right? Do you get that argument at all? Does that come up?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Right? Mm-hmm. And so you could say that some people have very strong individualism where they don't want to help or pay in for other people, and others would be more likely to say, yeah, let's pool the money, pool the resources, we're going to help each other. And the last one about masculinity isn't about male, female. So if I could ask Gert Hofstede to change a term, it would be that one. It's really getting at an assertiveness or a deference or collaboration. And so again, this idea that people are coming into Canada and working with us, we need this growth. And they're bringing with them different ideas about status, individualism, and assertiveness. And as an organization, we need to be aware of this and think about how do we help that person come in and work effectively with us, but how do we also respect that difference and not force them to simply become the way that we operate, right? And that's actually a pretty challenging question. Now, the last thing I want to mention is these, and they're called fractals. As I was teaching my workforce diversity and inclusion class, I had a really tough time thinking about all the social issues that are happening, the workplace issues that are happening, and examples in family life that are happening that all seem to pertain to equity, diversity, and inclusion. Like, how do I draw a boundary around these so that in my class, we're only talking about workplace things? Mm-hmm. And what I settled on was actually the idea of the fractal, which is a self-replicating pattern, that the issues that happen in family are the same issues that happen in the work life, same issues that happen in the society. They're just represented a little bit differently. So if we're talking at the family level, who gets the bigger portion at the dinner table? Mm-hmm. Who chooses where you go for vacation? What is the role of the eldest child? Same thing happens in your organization, and Ada's going to talk a little bit more about those, so I won't belabor examples, or in society, right? Who gets represented? Who gets the benefits? Who decides where the culture and society is going? And so this idea about fractals really helped me imagine that it's just scope. They're not different constructs, it's just the scope of the issue. So Ada, I think I'll turn it to you here.
Sure, that sounds good. Yeah, great. Thank you, Mike. So I'm going to have you do a fun activity. Imagine that you are now in a new country, for example, Japan, because it's completely different than here. And you are lucky to have enough money for the first 6 months of your 5-year stay. I would like you to discuss with a partner next to you about 2 questions. One is, what would you need to meet your life needs? And then, what challenges do you anticipate to encounter? So let's do that for a couple minutes with the person next to you.
Go through here.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, shelter and food and a job and.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of day-to-day troubles, basically. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can relate because when I first came to study in Canada as international students, that was back in the days. There are so many norms and culture and food, transportation, climate, everything was so different. But at the time I was very young, so I was very excited for the prospect of going to something completely different. So I get to try a different lifestyle. And then I remember, for example, the holding doors for people behind you. Yes. That's not part of the culture where I was from. So it took me a while to develop all these strong muscles to hold the heavy doors in the winter for people behind me, and I don't know when to stop holding the door for them. So that took a while. Other things such as one back home, that if we were given constructive feedback or told what to do by seniors, elder people, your parents, or people who are of authority, we're not supposed to look them into the eyes. But here, if we're having a constructive feedback conversation, if I don't look people into the eyes, that's considered a disrespect. Because eye contact is so critical in the interpersonal communications. Mm-hmm. And then long story short, at the end, even though I came with some knowledge of English, of course, because I went to university, and it still took me about 10 years to be fully comfortable in using the English language in formal business settings and eventually opening up my own business and teaching and giving presentations like this. So it takes a very long time to adjust, to adopt, and to be accepted at the same time. So the reason we're doing this activity is not for you just to focus on the Maslow hierarchy of needs on the right-hand side, but also for you to think about, we have lots of newcomers coming here for a living, and we're also shortage of staff in the workforce. So we need those people to be integrated into workforce to deliver the job. Whose problem is it to help these people feel welcomed and integrated? Is it nobody's job? Is it their own problem? Is it a company's problem? Is it government or social agencies or else?
That should be.
Thank you for the discussion here. For the interest of time, I'd like to pause the discussion here from a moment being, and I think you had led into a couple of really good examples in what we're going to share in the next slide is about the definitions. So today's topic is about ED&I, and you've heard the acronym so many times. There is no right or wrong order. Some people call it DEI, some people call it EDI, some people put it I first, and some people even call it IDEA, which is A stands for action. There's so many different ways of saying this. So I'd like you to just come up with one example, how you have demonstrated equity in your workplace. Just one quick simple example.
Well, I think everybody's voice counts.
Okay, yeah, equal opportunity for them to share. How about diversity? Example from your workplace demonstrates diversity.
Hiring people with different skill levels.
Absolutely. And how about inclusion?
Making everyone
Mm.
know.
A special greeting to, or a special note to an employee, acknowledging one of their holidays that we don't celebrate in Canada.
Yeah, exactly. So that brings us really well into the next slide. So this one is a little bit smaller fonts to accommodate to the people who like to read. So Mike and I put this slide together, summarize the definitions in our own words. The difference here between equity, diversity, and inclusion is that equity is really about the approach and methods. How can we provide a methods, an approach that gives people that equal access, that fair treatment? It's not like that we're giving the same thing to everybody, but rather give them a method or adopted method or approach so they can have opportunities to be hired at an organization without being judged or worried about their backgrounds or being promoted simply because they do a good job and their skill sets and potential. Diversity is really about the traits, the facts of the traits of our differences and things we're not so similar with each other. On the surface, these are things we see, we talk about all the time: race, gender, religion, belief, age, all of those good things. But thinking one layer beyond that, behind the surface, is the way of thinking. Other ways of saying that neurodiversity. It could be the way how we dress. It could also be geographical location. That people in Newfoundland, different time zone, slightly different accent, and maybe different way of doing work. It could also be the education level and where and how we got educated. Were we home educated, or were we going to PhD, or were we just high school graduates? It could also be experience. Where did we get our volunteer and work experience, and how do we approach a work problem? And then, last but not least, inclusion is really about that action. So diversity is about that fact, the traits, and inclusion is about that taking that action to leverage the differences among people so we can create that creativity and innovation in the workplace. And recently, our company just finished a board governance project for a nonprofit organization. And when we talk about examples for each one of these, diversity was very, very straightforward. With equity, we were trying to find ways why two board members had mentally quietly withdrew from board activities and eventually turned in their resignation before the term ended. So through our organizational audit, we had opportunity to spoke to these two people who had just left. An answer from them was one of them just moved to a different time zone. And hence 8 a.m. meeting doesn't work anymore. And however, the board wasn't that considerate of changing the time to accommodate the needs of the people on the board and their own volunteers. The other person who had withdrawn from the board opportunity because 8 a.m. she had to take the little kids to daycare. And so after that conversation, there's a simple change of time of the meetings could accommodate people's requests to give them that equal access to board meeting opportunities and make them feel included.
Sorry to interrupt you there, but that seems so wild to me that, because to me I would think, hey guys, I just started picking up my kids in the morning. Is there any, what limits, what on that board is occurring that people would feel so uncomfortable saying that, hey, I'm picking my kids up, that I would rather quit than tell you I'm picking, that seems, to me that's so wild that I need to understand right now.
It's a culture problem. Yes, it's a culture problem. So it goes much deeper than just the diversity of traits, right? So it's a culture problem that organizations weren't comfortable discussing those questions. And then had I been a newcomer or had I have challenges expressing myself, it could be physical challenge, it could be mental or whatever the challenge might be, I may not be comfortable expressing after a few meetings, there is no people even open up that conversation. I'm not comfortable speaking up, expressing, I quit. And then volunteer. So pay or not pay, that's a different story. It's more about I'm giving my time and not seeing any of the recognition of it. So and again, that's the inclusion, which is the action. Are we taking action to leverage people's strength, or are we taking advantage of people's differences and not taking care of each other? So, but good question, Lee.
Because that to me would be totally what Amelia is saying, is if I care about a cause and I'm on the board, it's really irrelevant whether you like it or not. If I'm picking my kids up, like that's, you know, it's my choice to participate in that board, and I want to be there.
Yeah.
So it would be my responsibility then to say, hey guys, look, this is a problem for me now. That's what I'm saying is that's where I agree with Amelia on that side of things, where I think that comes to that board member's responsibility to not quit and to instead disclose that information.
Shared responsibility.
Yeah.
But I think
exactly.
what she's saying is sometimes it's difficult to say that,
Yeah.
right? If you, you know, if you don't feel safe or you don't
Yeah.
trust that you can say that, right? Like you said, whether you can't articulate it physically
Yeah.
or even, let's say it's a woman and the whole board is men.
Yeah.
You might not feel comfortable bringing that up, right?
Yeah, and
So-
even if you do, they may not understand it. And they can, they're further stereotyping but long story short, the easy answer to, a simple answer to that, it was a cultural problem.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so that's the definition. Now I'm going to pass it to Mike to share with us more why EDI is important, just beyond definitions.
You can hold it down.
Oh, okay, all right, yeah.
And just think about the conversation as I'm sitting on the side. One of the words that comes to mind, some of the things we talked about, is psychological safety. Right, so different than physical safety is, do I feel under threat? And often, for people that are traditionally or well encapsulated in Canada, it's feeling of harassment or abuse is what we talk about with psychological safety. But for perhaps a newcomer, it's a sense of, I have a whole bunch of perceived strikes against me for language or culture or whatever. I don't feel safe to express an opinion about needing something for my family. Right, so that might be one way to be thinking about it. Now, Ada had shared some definitions, equity, diversity, inclusion, and when I first got into the topic, diversity was the one that first came to mind. We're talking about representation, variety, things you can count normally. I think equity is one of the harder ones to get at, right? As we're talking about not equality, but equity, perceptions of fairness, right? It's challenging to work through, and appreciate organizations that are really looking at how do we give extra opportunities to people that we might call it a leg up or an extra booster set in some ways, but making it so the playing field is fair. In EDI, we often come up with these sports analogies, but how do you help somebody who has been set back in the race a little bit because of family of origin or ethnicity or whatever characteristics they may have, so that they can compete fully? But the one I've started to appreciate more is inclusion. And as a HR person, one of the challenging terms I had was engagement. Like, why is it my responsibility in human resources or in management to try to help an employee feel engaged? And I realized that looking at inclusion versus engagement is on their side of the table. They're deciding how much they want to show up and feel invested and feel connected. So I might be able to do a couple things to influence that, but engagement is theirs. Inclusion is mine. As a manager, as a supervisor, as a co-participant in the organization, I can do things to bring them in. And so I've really started to appreciate the idea of inclusion, the sense of belonging, as actions as a leader that I can take. And Deloitte wrote an interesting paper just a couple of years ago now called Outcomes Over Optics, Building Inclusive Organizations. And the idea about the titling, Outcomes Over Optics, is, well, sometimes we're focusing on optics. We're doing things to look the right way, we're doing it at a surface level, but how do you actually get to things that matter? So they had a quote here: inclusion is the key to unlocking the potential of our businesses and our people. It's time to capitalize on our differences and build a more prosperous Canada for all. The document does talk at a Canadian level. How are we as a people group going to be successful? And if we're not acting in an inclusive way with our traditional peoples as well as our immigrating peoples, right, we may not be a strong, successful country in the long term. So we do need to do better here. And they also give guidance to individual organizations and to leaders what they might do for inclusion in the workplace. But it's just this idea of inclusion, this idea of bringing people in so they belong. Had a couple key outcomes. One of them is prepared to weather the storm. They talk about struggling and surviving through adversity. That if you have different perspectives and people feel like they are a part of the team and they're willing to bring their unique perspectives out to solve problems or to give ideas, then you're more likely to come through difficult problems like COVID, recession, other problems. And they found that more diverse, more inclusive organizations had that resilience, to use another keyword. They also talked about delivering financial performance, that organizations that were inclusive had stronger financial returns. Growing and thriving, that organizations that were more inclusive had an increase in employee count than ones that didn't. And challenging the status quo, that innovative and entrepreneurial ideas came more from organizations where employees said, my company is inclusive. Now they didn't share in their report how they would measure inclusion, but there is some indexes out there. One of them is called the Belonging Index, to get a sense of how people in the organization feel like they belong. And there's questions on there like, I feel like the organization cares about me, or people care about me. When I raise opinions and perspectives, I feel heard and listened to. I am recognized for the contributions that I bring. Right? These kind of senses of belonging. Honest communications. They have a nice phrase in here too. When you get, what does it mean to be belonging or included? And it's something to the effect of, there's a difference between asked to the dance and actually dancing. And some people feel like they're in the organization, their representation, to use another word, they're feeling as they're a token. I'm the token person of this age group, this ethnicity, this sexual orientation, this mindset, right? But I'm not actually in. And so how do we help people start to feel like they're actually dancing in the organization, not just in the room that the dance is happening? So we can go through more of what Deloitte has. You can take a look at it yourself. It's a great document, gives some ideas. But I want to turn back over to Ida, talk about strategies we might have for supporting EDI in our workplaces.
Thank you, Mike. So there are many organizations who would ask us, the question is, okay, we are prepared, we're ready, we want to move on, where do we start? Well, the answer is always going back to the organization strategy. So I want to do a quick recap here of definitions, just to make your 5 o'clock afternoon a little bit more boring. Mission is really about why we exist as an organization. And so, for example, for Parkland Chamber, the mission is to promote the economic and social well-being of the community. That's why the Parkland Chamber exists. And vision is about where do we want to be tomorrow, in the future. So again, for Parkland Chamber, the vision is to be that trusted source and also the business voice of the members in the community. And then when it comes to an organizational plan, sometimes it's called plan, sometimes it's called strategy or organizational or strategic plan. It's really about how we're going to achieve what we're set out to achieve, taking actions. So the question for you, a quick one, is when was the last time that you looked at the organization's mission, vision, or strategic plan? Today?
Yeah, it was last month. Yeah.
Last month? Not too bad. Last year? Never. It's really interesting that during the workshops that I've been delivering lately, and I walk around and just talk to people and say, do you know what's your vision and mission of your organization? And 90% of them will be like, don't remember, or never looked at it. Or some people even ask me, does it matter? So the number one killer of workplace engagements of employees is they don't know where the organization is heading and how their day-to-day activities actually contribute to where the organization is going to. The reason I bring that up is that if we want to have an inclusive workplace, and again with equity and diversity, those are great, but the end result, the outcome we want to focus on is inclusion, inclusive workplace. If we want to achieve inclusive workplace, we first need to look at where we stand in terms of our plan to achieve what we want to achieve as an organization. Cascading it down to the functional level, and then the frontline activities delivered by the day-to-day employees are actually aligned with where the organization is going. So let me give you an example. How many of you use Apple products? Okay, yeah, most of you do. Okay, so Apple is famous for its unique design and perhaps features, even though it charges you at a premium price. Mm-hmm. And so that's their organizational strategy. That's the way how they maintain their market competitiveness and attract customers. But at the same time, when it comes to hiring people and retaining people, they hire people who are independent thinkers with creativity, problem solving. Doesn't matter where they're from, or challenges or barriers they have. They promote, they hire people from multiple channels from all over the world because they care about the end result those employees can bring. And some people would be like, well, that's a fairy tale because we're not profit, we're a small mom and pop shop, we just don't have the pockets. I have a more humble example. I was once part of a hospitality company in the region that offers banquet services, facility rental, event planning to customers. And this company's strategy was to provide the best customer service they could possibly achieve at 98%. That's their target. And so when it comes to functional level strategy, what did they do with employees? Is they want to hire people who have customer service experience or at least that mindset to be trained. So that was their strategy. And they felt we have the best people, we have a good facility, we have really good plan how we're going to get there, and we have good leaders, so we're all set. However, with their surveys and focus groups and just observations with customers weren't as satisfied as the company had hoped for. So the general manager was puzzled and started asking more deeper questions and doing analysis of data and stuff. And then they realized actually the customer who use their service and come to facilities are from very diversified backgrounds. And again, we define diversity already. So those backgrounds are not just the physical traits, but way beyond that. So they also realized in order to make those customers happy, the employee space, the services they provide, and the ways they provide services need to mirror the base of the customers. Especially if the customers are coming from international countries. They have unique needs for food, unique needs for decoration, setup for the facilities, especially for writing, for example. It could also be people who need sign languages or accessibility for a wheelchair and things like that. So after a year of observing surveys and focus groups and analyzing data, the company changed their strategy and they reconsidered their hiring strategy. Is that they hired staff to gradually mirror the base of the customers, and the people who are already within our organization train them to think differently. So that's the functional level strategy. And then the frontline level, the employees start taking care of the customers the way they're supposed to. And then eventually the story ends with positive results. The outcome of the lesson from that, learned from that, is that looking at the surveys and analyzing the data took almost a year. And then realizing changes, implementing changes took almost another year. So, and this is a company of 200 full-time equivalent, so it's not a light and easy process. Strategy is not supposed to be jumped overnight. It's going to take some time. And then, along with that, is that people would ask questions, where does the EDI strategy fit? It's supposed to align and support the overall organizational strategy. It's not supposed to be standalone. Only one person or HR shop owns the strategy and that's the end of it. It's supposed to be part of the organizational strategy. And it's supposed to encourage and support the activities at department level or the areas level, and then informs and guides the day-to-day activities. And again, when your organizational strategy cascading down all the way to frontline, and all your frontline employees' actions from day to day also align with the overall organizational strategy, that's when we're going to reap the benefits out of it. And the last part of the strategy is, okay, now we have a plan, we have a strategy set out. In order to execute it with success, we need some tools to support ourselves. And the most common one we often hear is policies and procedures. Not just because I'm an HR person and talk about these boring things all the time, but first let's make sure we're legally compliant. In 2018, in our province, we had a brand new section added to the occupational health and safety legislation that's on respectful workplace conduct. And also says that when complaints are brought by the employees or contractors or volunteers, employers need to investigate it and have come up with a plan once they investigate and learn about what actually went on. It could be nothing was found, it could be that something was wrongly committed, then actions need to take to change it. Most common policy we should have in the workplace is respectful workplace policy. And that's basically to say that as a company, as an organization, we're committed, we have the policy, procedure, and tools to deal with issues. We define what's considered discrimination, harassment, bullying, and violence, and how we're considered what's right, how to treat people right, and what's our procedure when we have wrongdoing in the workplace. And then you also want to task people who are accountable, who own those policies and procedures, and who can answer questions and address issues. Leaders set aside budgets for ED&I activities. It could be training, it could be facility upgrades, It could also be the way how we approach problems. Leaders need to lead by example and demonstrate their commitment, not just lead by words. How many times we say that leaders say, I have an open door policy, and then when the employee really needs something from a leader, the door is always closed. Right? So that's just a very obvious example. Workplace communications or training is just one aspect of it. So of course it's important. But other things could be posters, emails, it could be sign languages or facial expression, like I mentioned earlier on about the eye contact. All of these verbal, non-verbal, sign languages, written posters, and signages, all of those are part of overall workplace communications. We don't need to be told we're disrespected to feel excluded from workplace. A lot of times it's a simple gesture. One of our clients last year hired a group of newcomers because they're short of staff, and then they figure, okay, let's just hire bulk of employees. And so this is a group of newcomers from a particular country, looked a little different. English language ability was somewhat limited. The manager was giving this group of people a tour of facility as part of their orientation. And there was a supervisor who had been with the company for 20 plus years. He saw this group of new employees coming, and he thought he was being funny. He stood there, he said, oh, Google Translator is needed. So even though the new employee's English may be limited, it does need to understand the words, but it's a gesture how he didn't make them feel welcomed. He thought it was being funny, right? But the way how it came across was not funny at all. And then culture. Culture takes time and process to build and to evolve, and then the commitment to continuous improvement in the workplace.
The things I have learned today, which I think also underscores part of the point of this conversation, is having conversations, right? Nobody has ever asked to touch my hair. It might be because it's out of reach, right? But inhabiting the experience that I have, I would not have thought to inquire about that. But if I do think to inquire about your experiences and talk about, simply ask the question of welcome. Is there anything about your experiences or your life that you think we should know about to welcome you effectively? Would give you that opportunity. It doesn't have to be because you're a certain person, certain way, certain background. It's just you are you, and for us to engage with you, can you tell us something we might need to know? Mm-hmm. Now, why do we do the things we do? Lots of psychological, lots of sociological theories behind this. One of the ones that I like is theory of planned behavior. Doesn't mean that it's a wholly rational decision. There can be subconscious, unconscious things going into it. But if we begin to form an intention to do something and actually do it, like this theory helps explain some of that. And you've heard that phrase before, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? We always think we want to do something and we don't quite get there. Or that knowing, doing gap, right? Now, this isn't quite the theory, it's an elaboration on it that I've put forward. But I just want to say a couple key parts about the theory. Theory of planned behavior has your intentions. You form an idea to do something that's preceded by a few antecedents, like your attitudes or social norms. And then there's another little box that talks about perceived control of whether you think you have the ability to do it or not. Those all influence your intentions and then to your actions. And it's used in a couple of areas, particularly in healthcare, right? It could be around health practices, so proper diet or exercising, or look at groups around reproductive health, using condoms or contraceptives, right? It's where this theory is kind of coming from most, but it's moving more into behavioral economics and more into management. And I like it really from the human resource management perspective. Like, why is it that a group of people might form an intention to ask questions of their coworkers? You know, what is it there about you I need to know? Or form a policy that is more inclusive, or hands-free in the workplace kind of policy. What is it that gives people that motivation to do that? And so looking at these personal norms, looking at the social norms, looking at the perceived control, in my experience with other companies, talking with them, I've broken it down into these 5 kind of broader antecedents of action. One being government. Right? The government can tell us you have to or should do something, and as an authority that we generally respect, right, we take that as direction. In older times, 20, 30 years ago, some of the government messages were wear your seatbelt, right? It's like, for the safety of our population, don't do this thing of driving without a seatbelt. 5, 10 years ago, some of the messages were more about, please don't discriminate against each other. We have aging people that need work. Please don't be ageist. We have newcomers to Canada. Please don't be racial or family of origin discriminatory. So we have these kind of directions or programs to facilitate it. We have personal still, our own attitudes or experiences. How I was treated in the workplace might influence how I want others to be treated, and programs I might bring into place. Directives, if you talk about a company perspective, personally, they might say, we want you to act in a certain way in the workplace. For example, in universities right now, there's a big conversation about diversity and equity statements. Should we have one at the university that says you will not engage in certain forms of talk, or all forms of talk are permissible? There's actually quite a strong debate happening, particularly in some American universities, about having a statement, a Chicago statement, or not having a Chicago statement. Or as we're hiring faculty members, do you need to include a statement in your application that says that you espouse and support principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion? Right? So you might have that, or job applications for more common positions. We've seen statements that say you must agree to support equity. Or training programs that companies might put in and says, okay, this is appropriate humor. We're now going through an appropriate humor in the workplace seminar, and we're telling you how to behave. There could be normative, your culture and peers, or different incentives. Again, give these ideas to people that this is how I'm going to act in an inclusive or non-inclusive way. So this framework is helpful, I find, for unpacking some of these perspectives. And my question, I'm going to keep it more rhetorical for now, just for the sake of our time, but what is influencing your intention for EDI action? Or what's getting in the way of your EDI action? Right? And this group is very talkative, which is wonderful. But I, again, keep it as rhetorical for our time. But just think about it, like, what's influencing you? And some of it sounds like it's very personal. Some of it might be broader messages you're hearing from the environment. Now, I'm going to go a bit further on this antecedent action framework by asking us to consider gender pronouns. On my email address, I don't presently have gender pronouns. It just says my name, or by an example, I have my business card, it just says my name and my role. I don't have he, him attached to it. My question for you is, in your organization, in your email address, do you list your gender pronouns?
No.
Actually, not a rhetorical question, an actual question.
Okay, no.
No.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know, not in any of mine.
Yeah, okay. Is that a purposeful choice, or is it haven't thought about it to include it? So let's unpack this just a little bit further, right? We talked about these antecedents, right? Government direction, like they have the protected grounds under the Alberta Human Rights Act. So whether or not we agree with the act, right? What our government has told us is that one of the protected areas is gender, gender identity, and gender expression.
Yeah.
And so they're telling us that for the civil society we're part of, if somebody is saying they have one gender, whatever they express it as, then that's a principle of that innate characteristic of that person that we are expected to respect. Right? So government could tell us. Now again, sometimes I speed. Sometimes I text and drive. Right?
Sometimes
so I don't
what?
text and drive.
Oh.
Like
So I don't
sometimes
always
we
follow
like
all the rules.
No.
Right? But one of the things that we may form into our intentions for ED&I is how our government is asking us to behave, right, or how to act. Now, there's other influences. Talked about normative. There's a large debate happening right now, still with Jordan Peterson as one of the principal voices in that conversation. He's a psychologist from the University of Toronto, and was known quite strongly about a year or two ago, maybe a little bit longer, for his disinterest and statement of not using stated gender pronouns in his classroom. Right? So you may say who you are, but I can't be compelled to use that. Right? And so some people identify with that argument. Other people identify with other arguments. Right? So we have these normative and sometimes personal experiences. person I was chatting with last year around equity, diversity, and inclusion was telling me that they weren't able to come to a presentation because their nephew was going through top surgery. Like, what is top surgery? Right? And it's, again, dealing with gender, sexual characteristics, right, in the top half of the body. I'm like, oh, so now I know a new term, but also that person, through the personal experiences people are connected with, has a different view of gender pronouns than I do or others may. So there's all these influences on us, and I don't know which is the strongest one, or in which circumstances which one carries most weight. But these are the things that lead us to think certain ways about equity, diversity, and inclusion, or certain issues. Now, this was a challenge that I chatted with the company about, and I'll leave this with you, just take home, this case study, about the use of gender pronouns in email signatures. And this person was going through the challenge of, they work for an organization that is a disability service type organization. So they're working very actively at being inclusive. And they had thought, should I put gender pronouns in my email? It might help with clarifying that this person is a female. Right? Some names are more ambiguous or don't have gender attributes assigned to them. Or based on your origin, your name and origin, it may not be familiar. So do I inherently know if Inderjit or Inderjeet is a male or female name in the Indian background? I don't, right? I would need to learn it. And same thing with people coming to here may not understand different names. And so having the pronoun could be helpful in the communication if we believe that gender is an important part of that. So the case walks through this person's thinking of, am I going to do this? What are the harms I may feel? What kind of statement am I making, and I don't want to make that statement? And therefore, will I do it? And then this person has a second question. They're in a leadership role in the company. Once they've made their decision, are they going to ask their staff to do the same thing? Or are they going to leave it to their own discretion making as well? So I bring it up. Again, I'm going to shorten our conversation a little bit, but to also suggest as a research topic, right? If you read the case study and you're thinking about EDI things in your organization, I would love to talk with you a bit further, have a conversation, perhaps you could write a case study about it for use with my students in the workforce diversity and inclusion class. Say, here are some real conversations that are happening in real organizations and pros and cons of approaching an issue and helping our students then understand, okay, here's what's going on. I think I'm going to end there. Actually, no, I'm going to leave one more point. Email communications is one of them, right, for gender issues come up. A couple other areas where gender might be an issue in workplaces, things around washrooms. Right, McEwen just renovated some of its ground floor washrooms in the building I'm in. They're unisex, right? I'll just tell you personally, a couple of years ago I was in Salt Lake City, walked into a museum there, I was visiting it, went to the washroom, walked in, it was a unisex washroom, and I went into the stall, and right beside me was a pair of high heels. I'm like, nope, right? It just didn't feel comfortable. I might have a different reaction now, but I thought, hey, I'm all for this is great, what's the issue? And then in the moment, right, talk about getting in the way, intentions and actions, right? Again, trying to understand what leads to that. Benefit plans. Who's included in your benefit plan? What's the definition of a spouse or a partner? How far do we go in terms of extended family? And for some groups, there's more people in the household than just mom, dad, and daughter and son, right? And so should benefit plans be more inclusive of the family situations that we have? Job ads. And there's services like Gender Decoder, which will read through your advertisement and look for language that may be biased towards or away from certain groups. And presentations and meetings and name tags, right? These things can come up.
Sorry, what's the thing about the name tags?
Oh, so for example, I walked into a conference and they had your name and the organization, and in the middle was a nice empty space where you could write in your pronouns.
Oh, okay.
And so it's a question of, am I going to write it or not write it, right? And again, these come up. So again, why don't we leave it there? Is that okay?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. So our last point then was about questions. Thank you for your time. If there's anything you'd like to work through with Ada or I in a public setting, we can do that, or we'll hang around for a couple minutes afterwards. But again, thanks for chatting with us and learning a bit more about the foundations and principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Thank you.
Well, thank